Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and joining me from Defector, we couldn't have a Vikings playoff game without Drew Magary. Drew, it was 2 years ago, right around this time, that you and I were hanging out in some place in downtown Minneapolis, watching the Jaguars come back against the Chargers and win a playoff game, and then the Vikings losing to the Giants the next day. We've come a long way in our lives since the last Vikings playoff game. How you feeling?
Well, first of all, I just want to say football. Okay, how am I feeling? Okay, so I'm going to tell you a quick story. So, first of all, in context of this week, there's a couple of things. One is that I can't talk about this game without talking about the the external circumstances around it, because I have lots of friends in LA. They were in harm's way, and could still be in harm's way. So I'm very, very worried about them. And that's sort of like the cliched puts things in perspective sort of thing. But the difference between the beginning of the week when was like, oh God, are they going to wake up in time for this playoff game? As opposed to, oh, well, this game might be in Arizona, and I just hope everyone, lives and that LA doesn't burn down entirely. It's quite a mood shift. But I wanted to just go back and get all my talking out of the way. Because 2 weeks ago, for the Packers game, I went up to see my mom. It was like right after Christmas, and I went to see my mom, and my sister's family was there, my brother was there, and my mom had a nice dinner out, and I had inherited a watch from my dad when he passed away last year. And it was a nice watch. It was a dress watch. It's not a watch you wear like when you're going to 7-Eleven, or it's like for nice events. My mom wanted me to wear it for dinner that night, even though she also knew that Vikings Packers was that night, right? So I sat at the dinner table with my Jordan Addison jersey on, and then also this nice watch. And then after like 20 minutes, I got up to go finish the game, and no one in my family gives half about football. They don't care about football at all. I'm the only football fan in my family, but they all kind of like the Vikings just because I like the Vikings. So they were watching me watch the Vikings Packers game. And, like sort of my mom was like, oh, you make it so much fun to watch these games because you're hooting and hollering. And I was hooting and hollering a lot. And I was wearing the watch and we won. So I said to my mom, I was like, oh, okay, I guess I got to wear the watch every game now. And she's like, yeah, you got to do it. And of course, the Detroit game comes, and I'm all fired up for that game. But I forgot to wear the god watch, and so I'm gonna use that little bit of superstition, because if I wear the watch this time and they win, then I have the talisman of destiny, and I will get them to win a Super Bowl. If it doesn't win, then I was just a stupid idiot and whatever. But I'm gonna wear the watch this time. So I'm hoping that turns the tide, but I cannot be certain of that.
Okay, well, that's a really nice story.
Thank you.
And I would like you to give the watch to the left guard, because he's gonna need any help that he can get along with the rest of this offensive line. And
well, it's that's the thing, is that it's so hard to know. Like, I think that the most sort of tired of us among Vikings fans just see the Green Bay game, or see the Detroit game as, okay, that's who Sam Darnold really is, and this will carry over, and there's really no way out of that. But, obviously in the greater, if you look in the greater sample size of the year, it's anomalous, right? That red zone performance, Darnold's performance, the offensive line performance, even, because their performance in the Packers game was the best I've seen a Vikings team play, or a Vikings offensive line play, in like 15 years. So we know they're capable of playing well. I think the only thing is I don't know how much the hangover from Detroit is affecting them. You're going to be the one who's going to be at the practice facility this week. You will know whether or not Kevin O'Connell still looks, a little shaken, because he seemed shaken after that game, and he was calling plays at the end of the Detroit game like he was scared of his own quarterback. That's something we haven't seen this year. So if that sort of thing happens again, that sort of mindset carries over, I think that would be more indicative than than anything else. But I'd rather just talk about the matchup, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the not going for it on 4th and 4 when they were down 17-9.
Yeah, that sucks.
I thought that that was about how Sam Darnold was playing more than this is the right decision to go to do this, because they had just given up a 7-minute drive, and you're playing against one of the best one of the best offenses and then one of the most aggressive coaches. Like, you really need this. You really need this drive. You really need to score a touchdown here, and to try to kick the field goal from 50 plus when your kicker's been a little shaky. He's like, I think that he himself is shocked at what is going on with Sam Darnold in that game. And I can understand why everyone in the fan base was completely shaken by that. But I also know that the end of a season doesn't always predict what's going to happen in the playoffs. And the end of the season for the Vikings overall was really good. I mean, they won 9 out of 10 games at the end, but it's really just the last thing you saw. But I am curious about what you think of Kevin O'Connell leaning on his experience in the 2021 playoffs with the Rams as a message to this team, because there's a lot of parallels there. They are going to have to go on the road. They are a team that has a lot of veteran players, that creates explosive plays and turnovers, but is imperfect. And they're going to have it click in to all work to go through the playoffs. But also, the Rams played a miserable game offensively and lost to the 49ers in the last game of the season. That
Yeah,
forced
they
them.
blew that game too.
Yes.
It was a profound collapse, and it cost them the division. So they had to go on the road to win the Super Bowl, and they did. But that was, yeah, I remember that game quite vividly.
Do you like that message? Do you like that concept?
I mean, yeah, it's all, you know, I think that Kevin O'Connell is very good at putting, you know, it sounds weird to say a happy face on it, but just a resolute face on it. You know, this was especially true after that Jacksonville game, right? Where he was like, you know, Sam Darnold played like, and he was like, look, I never thought of benching him. That would be stupid and insane. We're going forward. We're going to keep going no matter what. And the team took cues from there. And I think he knows that that's the best way to, you know, to get a good effort out of them. And I imagine he will be doing the same thing this week. It's just whether or not, you know, he is confident enough in his message to get it across convincingly to them. I think he is. And, you know, it ain't like I'm like, oh boy, I hope we trade him to the Bears. Like, I hope that the Wilfs pay him $30 million a year from now until, you know, through the rest of the decade and beyond.
So you want to talk about the game? Why don't we do it through concerns and confidences? How about that?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay, so why don't we begin with what you are most confident in going into this game? I'll throw one out there, give you a second. I am most confident that they will not miss all the same passes that they missed against Detroit, because, you know, I looked at all the film and then I watched other people's film breakdowns, like Chase Daniel, former NFL quarterback who once beat the Vikings at Soldier Field. And Chase Daniel's big takeaway was Sam Darnold didn't miss these throws all year. And it would be shocking if he did again, because the plays were there, the opportunities were there. And look, some people showering praise on Aaron Glenn. He did a great job. But also, those plays get hit. It is the game that we thought. It was going to be a shootout on wide open opportunities from Sam Darnold. So I am confident that he will not miss all of those same opportunities again.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. The other thing I would be confident is you know, the other side of that equation is our receiving corps. They played poorly in that game as well. You know, Sam eating was the headline and the thing that everyone noticed, and the thing everyone should have noticed. He played poorly, but you know, you had Justin dropping balls, you had TJ Hawkinson dropping balls, and they weren't like perfect throws, but they were ones. Those were throws. There were some misses that Sam had that you usually have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and TJ Hawkinson clean up for you. Like, they're able to sort of bail him out. They weren't able to do that in this game. And I think that is a pretty unique confluence of circumstances. I don't think that'll happen again. I think that we will be able to score points, because that's just, I don't expect us to do just nine, to score just 9 points, because I think it was also an obvious lesson to Kevin O'Connell that if he is confronted with fourth down situations similar to last week's this week, I think he will go for it rather than opt for the field goal. And I think that will help us score more touchdowns because, look, it's the playoffs now. You don't win with field goals. And the Packers learned that against us the hard way, and we have to teach the rest of the teams that.
Folks, it's a wonderful time of year in football, and there's a perfect dad hack that I want to tell you about that will get your kid to love Minnesota football the way that you do. It is called Future Fan Sports. At Christmas time, I gave this to one of my friends, and it worked like a charm. Future Fans helps little kids become big football fans by embedding the rules of football into parallel games and activities that make it very easy for a kid to understand. You get a box full of different games and a playbook that guides you along. For example, instead of trying to explain downs, they have a beanbag toss game with things like 4 tries or 6 points for a touchdown. All those things connect through a storybook that guides the entire future fan experience. The playbook also has lots of different mini games like word searches and bingo, where you check off all the different things that happen in a football game. It's only $49.99 at futurefans.com, and you can use the code PURPLE to get 10% off. That's futurefans.com, code PURPLE, and unlock a lifetime of memories together. O'Connell's decision-making, though, and his general overall in-game feel has been something that from time to time I've wondered about, which does not mean trade him to the Bears, as you said. It just means that even in this last game, there was coming out of the second half, they ran this deep over route with Jordan Addison that required Sam Darnold to throw the ball probably 30 yards in the air and layer it over a linebacker. Now, that's something he has done all year, but he was not doing that night. And the throw just comes flat and nothing happens, even though he had time to throw. And it's just, that's not really where you want to go with that. And the red zone, well, they've been good in the red zone. It hasn't been that much of an issue throughout the year. It is a concern for me that they cannot run the ball down there. And I'm sitting there thinking when they're at the 2, run 3 times, get in the end zone. But the numbers kind of back up. Don't ever run if you're the Vikings in the red zone because they're just so bad at it, which does not seem ideal for this team against the Los Angeles Rams, where they had some problems in the red zone the last time they faced them.
That's true because their front's very good. I look at Jared Verse, and you and I have talked, offline about Verse versus Dallas Turner, and I know how much older Verse is than Dallas Turner, but it's hard for me to not watch Verse play and feel a pang of longing. That's for sure. But you're right about the run offense, and there are multiple times in those tight spots where I wish O'Connell would just run 5 sneaks in a row because his quarterback is so tall, right? And also, I think that the other thing is that Kevin's timeout usage at the end of first halves has been very, very curious lately, and I hope that he corrects that as well.
That's another one where when he wins so many one-score games and has so many game-winning drives from his quarterbacks and all those things, I think that he's got to be, as far as a late game play caller, way, way, way above average. And as far as maybe staying calm and keeping his quarterback calm and all those things. But it's like every so often where you leave the team out there to try to run up to the line of scrimmage and create some sort of tempo thing, and then you end up running 30 seconds off of the clock like he did. I think that was the first half in Green Bay.
Yeah.
It is little things like that in a playoff game, if you botch that, or even the kicker kicking it out of bounds and then immediately giving up 3 points, it's like these things end up determining games. And
marginal stuff. Yeah.
There is a lot of the marginal stuff that I look at with this team and go, some of the game management, some of the red zone stuff, some of the kicking, and I'm sure the Los Angeles Rams have a long list of things like this too. But if we're trying to kind of pick apart some of these little areas that could prove costly if they aren't sharp on them, I think that they've got a number of them.
Yeah, and I think there's also the fact that you know, you have mentioned a lot of times Aaron Jones's performance at the end of Green Bay season last season, right, where he went 100 yards 5 games in a row and was dominant, was breaking big plays. I do not believe he's that player right now. He's not getting the support from his offensive line that he should. But when we needed a long run last week, it came from Cam Akers. It didn't come from Aaron Jones, and I don't expect that. I don't expect him to suddenly start busting off 40 and 50-yard runs now that we're in the playoffs. I just don't. I think, and part of that is the offensive line not quite holding up its end of the bargain. But also, I do think that there's a bit of burst loss on him. So whether or not we can get a few burst plays out of him or Akers or maybe, a random Ty Chandler carry, I think that would go a long way because all of the opportunities that presented themselves against the Lions, we made for ourselves in certain ways. If we make those opportunities again, I think we win the game. I think they will capitalize on those opportunities, but you have to make them first.
The offensive line does have to find a way to create some run plays that are successful. I thought, did so in one of the drives where Darnold hits against Detroit. Darnold hits a pass to Jalen Naylor, and they run like 2-3 straight times and get big chunks that got them down into the red zone. So it's been intermittent when it comes to the offensive line doing enough for Aaron Jones, but nowhere near enough to scare anybody, especially a team that is really dominant on the defensive line. And there were a few things, talk about shaking the confidence. I felt like I was less confidence shaken in Sam Darnold bouncing back than I was in Blake Brandel or even Cam Robinson, who they seem to find a way to get on an island against Zadarius Smith and Josh Pascal and ran by him. He ended up giving up 9 pressures in the game. 8 came from the guard, which we haven't seen since like Dakota Dozier days. And Garrett Bradbury remains Garrett Bradbury. So same
Right.
guy as always. And it just seemed that they had answers for the offensive line to confuse them and then create the one-on-ones that they were looking for. And as much as Cam Robinson has played a role in saving the season, I think after Darisaw got hurt, if he's island out there with Jared Verse, it's not going to be a good situation for them.
It's not. And I think that's where play design comes in because, this is a standard among fans, but I'm not seeing a ton of delays and draws in the arsenal from Kevin O'Connell. And that is weird to me for a team that thrives on play action, especially deep shots, because if you do play action, you draw, you got to draw the linebackers in, but if you just do a straight drop back, they're gonna float out a little bit farther from the line of scrimmage, and that's a good time to do a delayed handoff, especially to someone like Jones, who thrives so much in finding open space. He's very, very good at that, and you can do that if you've allowed the pass rush just to come forward and spread out around the pocket. Then you've made holes without having to sort of bulldoze people out of the way because you don't necessarily have road graders up front. So I'd like to see more of that. And I think because KO had to get conservative with his play calling late in the Detroit game, we saw some of that, but it wasn't advantageous running. It wasn't where the score 0-0, the score's very close. And you're doing this to keep them uncertain, keep a defense uncertain. You're just doing it. We were running in those moments as a matter of survival. And we have to do those things earlier in the matchup rather than later, because then, your intentions become a lot more obvious.
Sticking with the offensive side, I am confident that TJ Hawkinson will have a better football game, and Justin Jefferson, especially since the weakness of the Rams is their coverage unit. I think that the Detroit Lions had the right type of answer for the Vikings, which was to just grab Justin Jefferson the entire time, just hit TJ Hawkinson every single time he was coming off the line of scrimmage, which I haven't seen too many teams successfully do. I think the last team that successfully did it was probably the Jets, and maybe that threw off a little bit of the timing for Sam Darnold. Sometimes
Well,
it's
also
possible.
they just blitzed the shit out of them, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they just kept coming and coming and coming, and like first of all, the O line couldn't handle it, but there were not a ton of times when we were able to capitalize on it. And I have to think again, I do have the confidence that the coaching staff and the players are going to seize on that. And if the Rams decide to go zero blitz over and over again, you're going to see the ball come out faster and deeper. I'm hoping for quick slants, double moves, all that fun stuff.
Well, that was the odd thing to me about the way they handled it, and this is, I guess, boom or bust of a single game, is that Sam Darnold entered the Lions game with the top passer rating against the blitz this year in the entire NFL. And
Right.
then all of a sudden, things weren't going the same way. But I think that it does become a storyline of the referees and how many penalties they're willing to call, because the Lions really deployed the strategy of daring them on Sunday Night Football in front of 28 million people to throw them flags. And they threw two of them, I think, but probably could have thrown 7 or 8. They just weren't going to do that.
Right. And that was a crew that had an itchy trigger finger too. So I think we were all sort of anticipating that they would throw the flags that Justin usually gets, and he didn't get them. So then I think also the team was like, hey, wait, turn those machines back on. We're the flags. Let's go.
Well, I also think that you could see in Justin Jefferson kind of a frustration that, I mean, every week he's frustrated by getting grabbed and hit and so forth, but a frustration that we haven't seen from him really all year long about that. And even after the game in the locker room, he said that he felt like there could have been many more penalties called, and not in a like whiny way, just in a matter of fact, that was probably it. How do you think that the Rams are going to try to handle Justin Jefferson?
I think they'll hit the crap out of him. Like I think it's clear. You play press coverage on him. You hit him as much as you can at the line of scrimmage, and then you have your safety back there to back you up. That's that Justin can beat and has beaten many times in his career. I can't control whether or not a defense is going to play out of its mind, because the thing about the Lions game was that the Lions defense, irrespective of Aaron Glenn's design and Chris Collinsworth playing his agent and trying to get him a head coaching job, that's all great. But those players just played brilliant football and, tip of the cap and all that stuff. It is unlikely that the Rams will do that, because they are not only do they not have similar personnel. I say that even though the Lions were depleted, but also because it's just not the same circumstance. Like with Detroit, it was they're at home, they're playing for their first number one seed in their team history. It's the best season they've ever had. It's their best chance to go to the Super Bowl they've ever had. That crowd was out of its mind. And it was just sort of like, I think it was a situation that this team, the Vikings, will not find themselves in unless they have to go back to Detroit 2 or 3 weeks from now.
That is true. And do you think that there's something to, because I tend to, having seen that, having gone through that, and being able to deal with it better the next time? I think that all of these guys have played in environments that are raucous and so forth, but I don't know how many times Sam Darnold had taken a snap since his USC days with so much on the line like that. And not only that, but also in a noise environment. And they were thrown off a little bit in Seattle by that. But I would say
They won that
Seattle.
game though. He made the big boy throw that won that game though. And they won on Monday night against Chicago. And I know Chicago blows, but like that was national spotlight. They had to win that game if they wanted to stay in the conversation for the top seed. So, every game because Detroit has played so well, every game going into that final Detroit game was a big stakes game, and Sam performed. So, that gives me confidence going into this game. It doesn't make me 100% confident because I saw what I saw, but those are, I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater after a single game. I think that it is a reflex among certain Vikings fans to do that, but I'm not going to do that.
All right. How about on the defensive side? I think they played for about 3/4 of that game, or 2.5 quarters, as well as
Brilliant.
anyone has ever played against the
Yep.
Detroit Lions team. And when I look at Los Angeles, it's weird because when you're trying to find on paper, well, where are they scary on paper on offense? And the answer is nowhere really. I mean, their running back has a lot of yards, but yards per carry, he's very meh. Their top wide receiver is as good as it gets, but their passing game is not elite for the entire season. Stafford has his moments, but his numbers do not set your hair on fire. And yet, from what we saw of Stafford against the Vikings in Los Angeles, that does give you a little bit of pause. At the same time, they didn't know Puka Nacua was going to play, and
Yeah, that was the big thing.
they didn't have Blake Cashman. So those are two factors.
Yeah, I mean, Flores admitted it this week. He said we didn't know that Puka Nacua was going to play. That took us by surprise. And so one of my first reactions was like, really? Like, shouldn't you have planned for that? That's sort of the basic fan reaction, but also, going forward, okay, now you know. So now you know what to do. So I have more confidence they'll be better prepared for Nacua and also for Kyron Williams, because I know you just said that, Williams is sort of like an okay, yards per carry guy, but like he ran well against us last time. So the reason that the Rams beat us was because that their offense could do whatever they want against our defense. It was our defense's worst game of the year, I think by a considerable margin too. Even when you factor in the fourth quarter against Detroit, they could run it hard with Kyron Williams, and then Stafford. We couldn't get home to Stafford, and Stafford was on point with just about every throw as a result. So I think that the coverage on Nacua will be better, and I think that the run defense on Kyron will be better, just as it was on Jahmyr Gibbs at the beginning of the Detroit game. So then the question is, are you going to get Canton Stafford, and are we going to be able to get to Stafford before he can do that or not?
Well, I was curious about your feeling on Matthew Stafford in general, because it's been a roller coaster for me of opinions about Stafford throughout his career. There have been times where I thought, I just don't understand why every broadcast treats Matthew Stafford as if he is this Herculean quarterback when they would go 9-7 or something like that, and he would get sacked a million times. But the thing is that players can change. And what I've seen from Stafford over the years since he got to Los Angeles is he has been a great decision maker since he's been there. And that's where it all comes together with the physical skill, but he is not just throwing the ball to you. He has still some turnover worthy plays as always, but he's really reduced his sack rate, which was a huge problem for him earlier in his career. He gets rid of the ball quickly. They work the short game, and he's willing to do it and not just wanting to whip the ball down the field all the time. I think that makes him a dangerous quarterback because now he will be patient against this Vikings defense. And I think that that's been kind of the number one skill. If you can do against the Vikings defense, you could survive against them, is don't turn the ball over. Don't take sacks against them, which they're two of the best in the league at taking it away and getting sacks. If you can avoid those things, you could stay on the field and be difficult. But I'm curious what you think just in general of Matthew Stafford.
I mean, I think he's a Hall of Famer, and I've thought that I think really since I think like last year. I remember when he went from Detroit to LA. I had seen enough of him as a Lion to be like, okay, well, he's a very, very good, prolific quarterback, and he's the best, modern Lions quarterback and all that stuff. But that doesn't mean dick and whatever. But it turned out that he is, one of those rare quarterbacks that has all the talent in the world, but also the resourcefulness to use it, right? And that is actually something that I had seen out of Sam Darnold over December, where he was able to make, chicken salad out of chicken. That's what the best quarterbacks do, and that's how Darnold was performing. So I was surprised to see him not be able to do that against Detroit. And there are times when Stafford, he will look like that, that resourceful behemoth that I think he looks like most of the time. But then there are games where he looks like he's playing drunk. And I don't have a good handle on when that will be. I don't think Matthew Stafford has a good handle on when that will be. And so, it's really, you're going into this it's not all that different from how I have personally approached the season, which is just, it's found money, take every game as it comes, go 1-0 this week and all that stuff. I think it's, again, I am not, I have managed to flush the Detroit game. It took a few flushes to get it down, like to get down the toilet, but I flushed it. And I think they'll be able to do that too. And if they can, then they'll be sort of themselves. And the Rams will either be, the 7-2 team that they've been for that they've been over the past couple of months, or they'll be just a little bit underwhelming and inconsistent. And if they're that team, then we beat the piss out of them.
One more thing, and then I want to know the prediction. But what are you irrationally focused on in this game? Because last week I asked Andrew Kramer that of the Star Tribune, and I said I was irrationally focused on the referees and the grabbing and all that stuff, and that ended up coming to fruition. I think I may have mentioned the kicker as well, which also ended up turning out to be a thing. Is there something in this game that you are kind of obsessed with going into it as being a potential deciding factor?
I mean, Darnold's the first thing, but that's too obvious. I think one of the smaller things that I've been thinking about is our punt return unit, because obviously we have Brandon Powell back there, and he's the guy who beat us when he was playing for the Rams a few years ago, right? During that Super Bowl season. And he has been basically a replacement level punt returner for us. I like having him back there because he is, I'm pretty confident that he can field the ball cleanly. He hasn't always done that, but most of the time he's been able to do that. But after that, nothing really happens, right? So I think that if we can go into the playoffs getting if we can find some sort of proverbial edge on special teams, and that's not just kicking, right? Because, Will Reichert, if he has to kick 3 field goals this week and they're all from like within 50 yards, I think he can nail those. I'm not really all that worried about that. If he misses a kick, I don't instantly am like, oh my God, voodoo, like, oh, black, oh, we're cursed. Like, whatever. He missed some kicks. Kickers do that. But punt blocks, punt, good punt returns. He doesn't have to house it, but if you can return a punt in midfield and we can capitalize on that, that's a big deal. So that's sticking out in my mind. And then also the fourth downs, because, they said over and over again on Sunday night, Dan Campbell was the guy who went for it the most on fourth down. Kevin O'Connell was the guy who went for it the least. And I don't tend to think of O'Connell as conservative, mostly because he's bombs away with the play calling. But, the times that he has gone for it over the course of the season, I don't think I've ever had a beef with it. I don't think I've ever been like, oh, that's stupid. But I remember he went for it close to the beginning. I believe it was the Bears game, right? Where it was fourth down and it was close to midfield. Might have even been on our side of the field, or it was between their 50 and 40, right? And he was like, screw it, let's just keep going because it was 4th and 3, and converted on a pass to Jefferson and then go on and win the game. So I'd like to see more of that from him. I'll be very curious about how much he dials up the aggression, and if he bases that on just last week, on facing the Rams, or just on, just sort of his basic feeling about the team in general. Because when he says, I love this team, first of all, I love it when he does that. But second of all, I believe it when he says it. And so if he coaches like he is confident and he believes in them and they believe in each other, then I think that the result will take care of itself. But I'm going to need to see that manifested in how he manages this game. Also, I would like him to not holster any more timeouts until there are 20 seconds left and a half.
The fourth down thing, I think, is a little bit product of circumstance. They've been winning.
I think
for
so
most
too.
Of the season. Yeah, I don't think he's afraid of it. I think that there just hasn't been, because I was trying to think how many, that's why it actually surprised me that they didn't go for it. How many fourth downs were there in this entire season where I went, oh, come on, Kevin, you can't punt that. I can't think of too many, because they were always trying to protect leads throughout the season. I believe that they led for more minutes, more offensive plays than anybody else in the entire NFL this year, but they
Yes, that's
played from
correct.
ahead. So you have to factor that in. It's not just the most conservative coach versus the most aggressive.
No,
So I think that he will be aggressive, but I want to see how shook they were by the Rams game. I mean, this is a bunch of professional players who have been around for a long time. It's one of the most veteran teams in the league. So I don't expect them to be. But if you come out and go 3-and-out on your first drive, like what does it look like? Because remember last year, CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott in that first drive against the Packers, they went 3-and-out and they're yelling at each other on the sideline. And you thought this game might be over already with those two not being able to get on the same page. So
guess what?
how do you start the game? How do you start the game? I think even the first drive from both teams, normally if a team scores a touchdown, it's 7-0 other team, and okay, well off we go for a long day of football. But this one might be a little here we go again from what happened with the Detroit Lions. So I think that's one of mine is just who starts the game better. Because if you get ahead of the Rams, I do think they're not built super well to just come back against you, even with Stafford, but they have one main weapon. Cooper Kupp, not much of a factor anymore. I just feel like getting ahead of them early is probably one of the biggest things in this game. What are
I'm
you?
similar to oh, sorry.
I was just gonna go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm similar to you in feeling that way, but I always have it in my head about the first possession of the second half and not the first half, because we did the right thing in Detroit in deferring, and then we got the ball, and then Cam Akers broke off that huge run at the beginning of the second half. And like when you get that good drive at the beginning of a second half, then in my mind, it gives you a chance to really set the terms of how the rest of the game will go. And the fact that we didn't score on that drive was really, really, really painful, because those are opportunities, again, that the Vikings have consistently taken advantage of all through this season, and they didn't this time. So if they defer, and Kevin's really good about deferring. I like that he's not like, we'll take the ball to start because we want to set the tone. Like, that's always so stupid. Like, get the fucking bonus possession in the second half, right? If they defer and then, or even if they don't, even if they lose the toss and they have to go second, if they don't go 3-and-out in that first drive of the second half, because that was a Kirk specialty, then I will be pleased.
What's your feeling for prediction on this game?
So I made it a policy this postseason to not pick games. Like for Defector, like I picked all the games, but then I had my colleague Barry Pacheski pick this game, and I said, "Look, I won't get mad at you, no matter who you pick." He's like, "Okay, well, I picked the Rams," and I was like, "Screw you, buddy." But I was like, "Okay, fine," because I know why. I think most people are going to pick the Rams because they're getting the points and they're at home, and because they just saw how the Vikings played a week ago. They saw the Vikings at their absolute worst, right? So I'm inclined not to want to pick the game. If I will tell you, though, I am quietly confident in terms of personnel. I know that we have the better personnel. In terms of coaching, I know that we have one of the best coaches that we've ever had. He's going up against a guy who knows him all too well, and you got to think that kind of factored into the last loss to the Rams. But I am confident in the team and the coaching. I'm confident that they can win this game. I'm not going to guarantee anything, but if you were going to ask me to pick the game, and again, I'm not picking it, but if I were hypothetically going to pick the game, I would say we win 30-20.
But that's not your pick.
That's not my pick, though.
Okay.
That's not my pick. That's not on the record. I never said that. And I disavow that pick entirely, especially if we lose. If we lose, then I never made that pick.
Then you definitely never made that pick. Okay,
Shit,
I
no,
got
no,
I,
not good.
I got it. I think we've got the right framing. Before you go, I would be curious to know your favorite Viking playoff game that you ever watched. Did you have one where it's your top Viking playoff memory?
I can't believe that my memories on the playoffs are so okay. So there's an obvious one, right? I mean, the most obvious one. The most obvious answer is also the clearest answer, which is the Diggs catch, right? That's the Minneapolis Miracles top dog. The one that I liked prior to that was 2009, prior to the NFC title game. Dallas came into town and we beat the unholy out of them. And I love a good playoff route, especially when we're not on the wrong end of it. That's been very nice because I'm a guy who, I'm not old enough to have seen this team win the NFC, and that's very annoying. So I'm the Vikings fan who's like, look, I'd just like to see them lose a Super Bowl. Like I would just like to see them go to the Super Bowl, even if they lose it. So any time where they have dominated in the playoffs, I've been pretty happy. But I also have memories of the NFC Championship game failures, or like a really crummy wild card loss to Washington in the Dennis Green era, where they lost 20-3 or some horrible shit like that. So I'm hoping for more good memories going forward. I think I'm gonna get them. I really do believe in Kevin and Kwesi. And by the way, I don't really want to go anywhere. Can we keep talking about like individual players and matchups and stuff?
Sure. If you want to keep talking about football, well, we get to keep talking
I
about
do
football.
want to talk about football because
What do
also
you want to talk about? What football?
okay. I got a question for you.
Okay.
Well, I guess. Well, I don't know if I can ask you this because you're a journalist and not a fan. But
I'll figure it out.
are you hoping that the Packers upset Philly so
Mm.
that we don't have to go to Philly, but then also if Washington beats Tampa, then hey presto, the Vikings are hosting a home playoff game in the divisional round, which is no small thing.
So I have been thinking a lot about this, about the scenario where they go to Philadelphia instead of Detroit, and whether that would be better for them. And I have results are inconclusive on that, which would be, I think that's if Tampa Bay wins and Philadelphia wins, then Washington wins and Philadelphia wins, then the Vikings go to Philly, right?
Right.
I've got that right. And Philadelphia has a lot of the things that the Vikings do not want any part of, which is the nastiest defensive line. They also cover man-to-man extremely well, as I was reading Doug Farrar this morning of USA Today when he was talking about that. And, I think that building, that aura, that place is something that you don't want much of. At the same time, Jared Goff has a solution to this Vikings defense. I don't know that that's going to be the case for Jalen Hurts, who actually could not pass the ball last year against the Vikings defense. It threw an interception to Theo Jackson, and I know they ran that whole game. The Vikings have a much better run defense now than they did last year, but Hurts did not pick apart that defense very well at all. And I think I would always rather take the lesser passer to play against if the teams are equally strong, which I think that Philly and the Detroit Lions are, especially now that we know Detroit can get after Sam Darnold. So that is a tricky one. That's a tricky one.
I mean, there's a couple things. One is that, first of all, I want to dispute that Goff figured us out, because for the first half of that game on Sunday night, that was not true. He was bad, and we made him pay for his mistakes. A couple of interceptions. We just didn't capitalize on it, right? We capitalize on it. That second half goes differently. Jahmyr Gibbs does not score 4 touchdowns going away. It doesn't happen. So, I'm not that scared of Goff. Like, I respect Goff, but I think that he can be had. As for Hurts, I think you're correct. He is not a particularly gifted passer on shorter intermediate routes, and that can be taken advantage of. However, we go to Philly. Well, exactly how much bullshit us fans are going to bring to that game, right? And you also know like how Philly fans are going to be about. Like, I'm going to have 38-7 in my feed just on an infinite scroll for the entire weekend. It'll be so annoying. It'll be just the most annoying thing ever. And I think that's the thing now, is that I'm less traumatized by poor Vikings performances than I am just deeply irritated by them, which I guess represents personal growth on my part. But it doesn't make, I don't like being irritated, so I don't want that. I still remain of the mind that bring them all on. Like, you're going to have to beat the big boys sometime, whether it's on your turf or theirs. You're going to have to do it, because you can't just back into a Super Bowl. Even if you're like, even if you're Colts era Peyton Manning, you don't automatically get to fall into it. You have to beat the big boys, and you got to play like one. And I've seen this team do that, and that's what it's going to take. So go ahead, have all the. I don't want to stoop to rooting for Green Bay anyway. So go ahead, have Philly win, have all the big boys win, and let's go and let's beat them. Because every unit of this team, of this Vikings team, has Pro Bowl talent. Every room, right? And I'm counting the line as one room, by the way. I'm not counting the interior line as one room, right? And what that means is that you will not be outmatched if you are on point. And I expect them to be on point. And I look forward to this has been a season where I've just been very, very excited to watch them. Like we cannot get to game day fast enough. That hasn't always been true in other Vikings years because like last year, they sucked. They didn't have a quarterback, and it fell apart at the end. This is different. I still have a great deal of joy and enthusiasm for this team, and for the players. I loved Jordan Addison coming alive at the end of the season. I still want Hawkinson to get his touchdown and to get sort of his define, because he's had good games since coming back, but he hasn't had that game where he defines it. He hasn't been the main character of a game yet. I'd like to see that happen. I'd like to see Justin have like a 200-yard game. And I think he's capable of that. Like, I think he's capable of the same playoff run that Larry Fitzgerald had back in 2008. Like, I think he's that kind of player. That's the sort of thing I'd like to see. I'd like to see maybe if Aaron Jones can find his burst, particularly on the plays that we talked about earlier. And then defensively, that last game that we had against the Rams, that was on 4 days rest. They were just freaking exhausted because they had slugged it out with the Lions in a game that I thought was much more indicative of the matchup between us and Detroit, of how we match up with Detroit. I thought that was a much more accurate depiction of us versus them. But the fact that was a heavyweight fight, and then we only have 4 days to prepare, and we don't prepare for Puka Nacua, and then we go and we have to get on a plane to Los Angeles. I think all of that factored in. And I think all of that is the reason that the Rams offense could do whatever it wanted in that game. I don't think that will happen again. I'm excited to see if our pass rush can get home and then make turnovers, because when Ivan Pace made that pick last week, I made some really odd sounds, just really awkward and uncomfortable for anyone who happened to hear them.
Well, just to address all the potential permutations of what could happen if the Vikings win here. And I do agree that the extra day is probably more helpful for the Vikings. Well, the
Huge.
Rams were going to be well rested anyway, but playing this on Monday is helpful.
They were coming off a bye. Yeah.
Right. So there is a scenario, if I'm not mistaken, where the Bucks win and also the Packers win, and then the Vikings go to play Tampa Bay, because the Packers would have to play against the Detroit Lions, right?
Got it.
Detroit. That to me is the best scenario. That is the one to root for, is other than the home. I mean, of course, both teams pulling upsets and you get to play at home would be the absolute best against Washington. But the second best is going to play a pretty flawed Tampa Bay team, and with a very key marker to what they do, which is turn the ball over. The Vikings are the best at taking it away. Play a team that's reckless with the football and a quarterback that can be reckless with the football in Tampa Bay, which is not a terrifying place to go play by any means.
Yeah, but you get Baker on a heater, man.
Yeah.
You never know, man.
You do never know. That's why we enjoy the games. What else you got for the playoffs? I mean, there's a lot of intriguing matchups here. I don't know that in the AFC side, there's anything other than like these several teams should very clearly win these games. Buffalo, Baltimore, and I think the Chargers.
Yeah, those games are kind of crappy in my opinion. The NFC games, I think, are much more interesting. It's weird that you have the NFC first and then the AFC first and the NFC last. I guess that's how they do it, but that's a bit odd to me. I will like, you watch these games, and even if the Vikings aren't in them, you sort of keep those the sort of hypothetical matchups against the Vikings in mind when you're watching these games. And so, I think about, how we would match up against Buffalo or Kansas City, or less daydreamy, but how would we how do we match up against Mike Evans and the Bucks? How do we match up against Jaden Daniels and the Commanders? I think all of those questions are interesting, and I'm curious to see how we would answer them if we had to answer them. But for the moment, I'm just focusing on the Rams because this has been one of the strongest line of scrimmage Vikings teams that we've had in a while, particularly on defense. And we lost the Rams game because we lost the line of scrimmage last time. And I'd like to see if we can correct that. Because I think if you see us perform at our expected level and actually like cover the spread and win this game convincingly, I think that changes the narrative. I don't like using that word, but I think it changes the narrative in all of the exact same, but in all of the opposite ways that the Detroit game changed the narrative for us, right? Because the Detroit game made it very easy for people to say, oh, well, they're frauds and, like, oh, Sam and all that stuff, which, like, look, it's very nice that the Sam versus JJ thing just gets solved for me and I don't have to like worry about it and argue with you in the offseason about it. But, I don't want that to be this team because I would prefer to enjoy this year as much as I possibly can.
That's probably been my biggest frustration throughout this season covering the team is that there's so much focus from the national media, especially. They can't seem to talk about the Vikings in any other way than what they're going to do with their future quarterback situation. Just to add a note on what you said about the trenches, the Rams by PFF 30th in pass blocking, and that could certainly be a factor for the Vikings getting after Matthew Stafford and making some game-changing plays there.
Yeah, I don't want it to be one of those games where there's a clear mismatch, and yet we somehow lose it because like the other team suddenly becomes magic. Like that's what happened against Detroit last week. I don't want that to happen. That's annoying.
But as far as the Darnold and McCarthy thing, let's bury this in the back end of this podcast. Do you have a take on that?
If you'd asked me after the Packers game, I would have said, "Oh, okay, they'll tag him and they'll keep both," and I would have been perfectly fine with that. I still think that Sam Darnold's fate lies entirely in Sam Darnold's hands, and I mean that two ways. One is obviously how he plays, going forward in this game, and then any games that happen to come if we win, whatever subsequent playoff games there are. And then also what he wants, right? Like say, we get to the end of the season and like the Rams say, you know what? Stafford's probably, only got one, Stafford, maybe Matthew Stafford wants to retire at the end of this year. I don't know, whatever. We'd like you. Like if there's an organization that is not the Jets or Giants that courts Sam and he knows that they have their shit together in ways that he knows the Vikings have their shit together, then he's a free agent. He's going to have some, it's going to be up to him in certain ways because yes, we can tag him, but you don't want to tag a player who ends up being really pissed off, especially if that player is your quarterback, right? You can tag T Higgins and T Higgins will make, great, catches for you just so he can get out of there. Right. But I think it's a little bit different with Sam. And so I'm still basing it on what's going to happen because this is a case where I trust all of those people, Sam Darnold included, to make that decision instead of me. Like I have a very, very strong feeling that JJ McCarthy will be excellent. And also if they pick JJ after the season that Sam has had, then they really know something that we don't. Like they really know, like, okay, this is no bullshit. This is the guy who, everyone's already saying, okay, JJ would have been the number one pick in this draft, right? This coming draft, which is absolutely true because this quarterback class is crap. I think that if they make that choice, then I will be extremely confident in them. But if you asked me right now, I would say, okay, well, just keep both because you kind of can. And, I'm seeing the holes in the roster. I still think that they can be patched. And maybe Sam is not the sort of guy who is going to want everything guaranteed right up front to right away, right? Like he may be a bit more amenable than that. I'm not asking him to play for $10 million again. He's not going to do that. He's not an idiot. But the idea that he would be like, okay, we can structure this contract how you want, so you can get the guard who's not going to get me killed, right? Like I think I think he's sort of that kind of guy. So my basic answer, which again is it's almost as unsatisfactory as my non-pick of the game, is that I'm happy with whatever direction they go in, because I can afford to be when I know that my team's leadership is so sound. You know, if this were the Jets making that decision, I don't trust the Jets to make that decision. They're the Jets, they suck, right? But we have a GM in Kwesi and a head coach in Kevin who not only know what they're doing, but they know each other. I think it took them years to get to that place, right? But I think that they now work in pretty good harmony, and I think that would remain true even if Grigson and Flores leave. And I'm more inclined to think that Flores will leave now that he's actually getting interviews, as opposed to last year when he got none of them. So, I still think that regardless of what happens in terms of churn on the coaching staff or even in the front office after this, that we'll be in a good spot to make that decision. Because again, it's not about who you pick or where you pick them. It's about who's doing the picking. And we have really reliable people on that end. And that's good. But I do want to say that watching Sam this season has been so much fun, because he's just been bombs away. And like aesthetically, I don't think you can ask for a more fun Vikings team than this one. There's a reason that your boy Brian Murphy was comparing him to 98, because, you know, long bombs, chicks dig the long ball and all that stuff. Like, it has been that sort of year. And that's something that I will, regardless of what happens against the Rams, it's something that I'm going to keep with me, just as I kept all the cool stuff that happened in 2022 with me, even though we blew it against the Giants.
With your point about the organizational competence, this is where I get the most pushback from people, but I will stand my ground on it, which is if they do keep Sam Darnold, I think there's some sort of fear that the franchise will collapse into one of the Great Lakes or something. And I think that they've really proven that they can work around certain challenges, including $70 million of dead cap for this season, and that they've got plans for every potential outcome. I mean, I think
because this roster is still cap strapped. Like, we're still carrying Kirk's number on the books. So it's like, this roster is not at full fiduciary strength. And if you're paying Sam Darnold to play for you next year, you are getting your money's worth. I mean, he might turn to shit. I don't think that's what would happen, but the point being that you're spending money on things you have rather than things you used to have.
Right. And they can figure these things out in a short term, and then give it more time to figure out like where JJ McCarthy is. Because I think when we talk about what JJ McCarthy is going to be, I have a lot of confidence as well, having seen him during training camp and during the preseason game. A lot of confidence that he could be a really good quarterback, but he has not played any real football, and he's thrown about 400 passes since he became an adult. I mean, really, you're really having to project a lot there. Whereas another year as a backup and having a full year of actual practices and training camp and preseason will give you a much better sense of where he stands. I've always thought that just throwing it all on his shoulders was a really tough ask. It's not about JJ versus Darnold. To me, it's just there's a lot of, I think, risks involved with asking him to be everything as the franchise quarterback after he missed an entire year this year.
Yeah. Oh, that's the other thing, is that, I'm going to give you a more satisfying answer, which is please keep both because of health. We don't know. I think that JJ will recover from his meniscus tear fully, but you could tear it again, right? Or you saw Darnold limping at the end of that Detroit game. I don't know how many like fractured bones he's got floating around in his body right now, right? That's all the stuff that comes out after the season where you're like, oh yeah, he played with a dislocated clavicle and a bone in his throat. Like, you don't know that stuff until after the fact. But it's a 17 game season. We've already been over a year ago by losing a quarterback. If you can have a situation where you actually do have two quarterbacks, and it's not the the proverbial, if you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterback situation. If you have like two viable quarterbacks, and one's a veteran who just had an MVP caliber season, and one's one of the most promising prospects that you could have, and you can keep both, do it. It's a long season, man.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, and what people get a little too obsessed too with the rookie contract, where it's not only is it 4 years, but also if the player is likable and you want to extend him, then for the first 2 years of that extension, it'll be reasonable cap hits. And then by then, Amazon has bought the league and the salary cap is $8 billion.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like once you start laying this whole thing out on paper and how it would actually affect them, you end up coming to the conclusion like, oh, well, it probably won't. I mean, it probably won't in any way that we think. And I also feel like if you're conflating what happened with the Kirk era to this, it's a totally, totally, totally different story.
Yeah.
One, because the quarterback was not as good as Sam Darnold has been this year. The playmaking, the scrambling, the deep passing, all that sort of stuff. That's number one. 14 wins and 100 point differential and all that stuff. But also they did have 2 seasons with Kirk on the books where they did keep everybody, and they
Yeah.
didn't, and they should have won, and they should have been better. They had the 17 team together and it just didn't work out. It was really only that they extended Cousins in a time where the rest of the roster needed a complete rebuild. I don't think that that's the case where they stand right now. So
No, they still feel like a fresh team, and that's what's been so nice about this year.
right. It feels like the future remains bright for this team. And if you have two really good quarterbacks, then you just have two really good quarterbacks. Shout out to John Madden, though. I do love him. So anyway, okay, how about this? One more question for you.
Oh.
You're the one that asked for more football talk. So
Mm-hmm.
since I said John Madden, if you were to go back in the history of football, of you watching football, and grab two broadcasters that are alive for this Vikings Rams game for you to watch it, whom would you place in the booth?
Well, you were leading the witness, man, because like I'm gonna pick Summerall and Madden, right? Like that's just also because it's not against Green Bay or San Francisco, because Madden, like he was like Collinsworth is the same way, but Madden was better. But Madden had crushes, and he had a lot of crushes on the Packers. And you know, I appreciate John Madden a lot more than I did back when he was active, because back when he was active, I was very annoyed when he was like, "There goes Frankie Winter's bag of donuts," and I was like, "Oh, who gives a shit? I don't care about Frank Winters. Go to hell." He just, I think he liked any team that played on natural grass more than one that played on turf, which I get. But now, we're playing the Rams on turf, and the Rams are, the Rams are obviously an old franchise, but they're also a new one in weird ways. So I don't think I would get as much of the old man salivating over Tutu Atwell or whatever. I think we would get equal amounts of spittle our way, and I'd be fine with that. Otherwise, give me Uncle Vern. I miss Uncle Vern doing football
Vern, yeah,
games.
yeah. I was gonna say if it's not Madden, then Mike Patrick, Joe Theismann, and Paul
No!
McGuire.
Oh my God. Shoot me dead. I live in Washington, by the way. I'll sometimes hear Joe Theismann's voice still against my will, and it's just, it's physically painful to hear the man speak. Just the worst.
Those guys had so much energy. I love that broadcast.
Like Paul McGuire, just no brain. You talk about tough. These guys are tough. Oh, please.
Oh man.
Save me.
All right. Well, Drew, this has been great. People can read you at Defector, and maybe you'll pick some football games over at Defector other than this one. So
Yeah, no. I'm now even more jazzed for this game. I'm super pumped up. I'm gonna sing the Vikings song to lead us out, but
go ahead.
I do want to give my best to LA. I love that city, and I want everyone there to be safe. Not just the property. I want the people to be safe, and I want them to be happy. So
And
But
people have asked about I have family out there. They live in the valley, so at the moment, no issues for them. But
it's
it
Los
is.
Angeles. We all have
Yep.
some tie to it.
Yep.
It affects all of
Absolutely.
us. And you know what? Not to get too macro about it, but this is something that's going to affect all of us going forward. This will not be the last time this happens. So, just say your prayers and get ready to help. Get ready to fetch some water and buckets and all that stuff. In the meantime, I hope we beat the out of the Rams. Skol Vikings, just win the game. Skol Vikings, honor your name. Yeah.
Thanks, Drew.
Yeah.
Football.